Good day and welcome to Westchester Talk Radio and also Putnam and Dutchess Talk Radio, all wrapped and rolled into one here. And I'm John Marino, and we are brought to you by, made possible by people like our good friends at Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center, supporting our communities right through April of 2021. Lipolis Electric, don't be left in the dark. Get Lipolis. And Hightower Westchester, managing your wealth to a fiduciary standard. Here at Westchester, Putnam and Dutchess Talk Radio, we are produced by Sharc Creative. That is Sharc with a C, not a K. You see the orange logo on the wall behind me. We are WestchesterTalkRadio.com, PutnamTalkRadio.com, DutchessTalkRadio.com, all wrapped into one today because we are covering a subject that concerns all three counties. High school sports, the 2021 high school sports season, of course, beginning here in the fall now, 2020 into 2021 high school sports season. And what kind of a season will we have because of the COVID-19 pandemic? We are joined by Josh Thomson. Josh is the sports editor for Journal News, Aloha.com, and the Poughkeepsie Journal, which, of course, covers the Hudson Valley straight through. Josh, welcome to Westchester, Putnam, Dutchess Talk Radio. Of course, Section 1 covers all three of those counties and Rockland County, too, as we talk Section 1, 2020 and 2021 high school athletics. First of all, how badly has this pandemic shaken the high school sports scene locally, and in what direction are we heading now?
It's shaking it up tremendously, John. I mean, you're talking about now. It's been, it's late September. It's over 6 months now, 6.5 months since most of these coaches and athletes have gotten together. March 11th was the last day there was any kind of competition. There were some state basketball games that day, March 11th. Many of these football programs, which normally would be in the thick of their season right now, their coaches have said to me they haven't seen each other since around March 3rd, so about a week before. The winter season was postponed and eventually canceled. So obviously that's been a huge undertaking. Trying to keep the players and the athletes engaged as much as possible, making them have some hope that they'll have a season. Right now, the way it stands around the state, September 21st, this Monday, is the day you're allowed to start practice in lower risk sports, meaning field hockey and soccer and cross country and tennis. And then in Section 1, that date was pushed back. It'll be September 29th, next Tuesday. We'll see if they can get that off the ground. Several sections across the state have already pushed all of their fall sports, including those low-risk fall sports, back into that March 1st season, that season they're kind of trying to squeeze in the middle of the winter season and the spring season. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here locally. But obviously COVID-19 has done great damage to the high school sports seasons, but it was the winter, the spring, and now again the fall.
The New York State Public High School Athletic Association is the decision maker, providing all the guidance for all of this. How did they determine what sports are high risk, what sports are medium risk, and what sports are low risk? I see that list, and I wonder about certain things. For example, basketball, medium risk. As Governor Cuomo said when the pandemic began, if you are playing basketball the right way, that's kind of high risk. If you're going to cover somebody on defense and you really got to get on somebody, put your hands up without touching them, obviously. How much more high risk could that be?
Well, so there are two different distinctions, where sports are kind of put into categories differently. One, the first one that came out was the NFHS, National Federation of High School Sports Associations. That was where you're talking about deeming basketball medium risk. That was one set of guidelines. Volleyball, for instance, was deemed medium risk. However, the one that weighs out here in New York State with the NYS, BHSAA, and with the governor's office is the New York State Department of Health, and that categorized sports a little bit differently. In their categorization, basketball is actually high risk. Football is obviously high risk. Volleyball is high risk, which is why they're not playing this September. If and when sports do get up and running, right, volleyball will not be one of them because that was deemed high risk, where the NFHS deemed volleyball medium risk, or moderate risk. And so that's where all those distinctions come from. The state athletic association there are basically saying it's out of their hands. They're going by guidance given to them by the State Department of Health, and so is Cuomo's office, and that is that you can't play football, you can't play volleyball, and you can't have competitive cheerleading this fall. A lot of people think, maybe rightly so, that sports like soccer and field hockey are just as high risk or more high risk, say, than volleyball, because there is a lot of contact. We know in soccer,
Right.
there's certainly quite a bit of contact. There's a lot of competition for 50-50 balls in midair. And those are things that, do create some contact between sweaty players that are heavily breathing. And right now, soccer and field hockey have been given the go-ahead with cross country and tennis for this fall. The one sport that's kind of somewhere in the middle is swimming. Girls swimming usually competes in the fall in Section 1 and in the state. Right now, that's a little up in the air, but that's a different situation. That's not about the risk factor from the State Department of Health, which would give swimming the okay to go this fall. But right now, it seems like Section 1 is having issues finding pool space because a lot of pools, because of their COVID restrictions, are closed or have limited space. And so that swimming is kind of up in the air still. But, yeah, John, it's all about the State Department of Health. And as long as those guidelines are in place, the schedule is kind of what it is in terms of who can participate and who can't at the high school level.
Now, cheerleading is also determined to be a high-risk sport. So we have cheerleading through every sports season, fall, winter, spring. Does this maybe put cheerleading on hiatus until next year, maybe?
Well, that it's competitive cheer, which I believe is a different distinction than cheering for a team. So
Right.
when you're talking about these competitive cheer competitions, yeah, I mean they're moved to March 1st, just with football and volleyball right now, and that kind of shoulder season between the winter and the spring. So they'll compete then, but we'll see what happens. I mean that's the optimistic viewpoint, but there's no reason to think, or no guarantee, I should say, that these risk distinctions will have changed by then. I mean, even basketball season and hockey season and wrestling season, which right now are scheduled to start November 30th to start practice, are they going to be given the okay by the State Department of Health and Governor's Office? And right now, the high-risk sports haven't been. And will they have been given that okay by November 30th? November 30th is not that far away. It's a little over 2 months from now when a decision will have to be made. So I don't think that's a guarantee right now either. And then, you get into March 1st. Is March 1st football and volleyball and cheer, have they been given the okay to even compete? Then, we won't know. That's still up in the air. I think that everybody kind of breathed a sigh of relief earlier this month when the NYSPHSAA said that those sports will be moved to March, but there's no guarantee they'll be played as of right now based on, where the decisions from the governor's office and the State Department of Health and in terms of what's allowed and what's not.
Now, I think one of the key questions here is the effect on all of these student athletes, especially seniors and juniors to a large extent too. This is their time to shine, for them to show college coaches and programs what they can do in their respective sport. And for a number of these athletes, it's more than one sport. You have athletes who take part in 2 sports seasons or in all 3 sports seasons all throughout the school year. How badly are they affected now?
Well, you talk about the multi-sport athletes. I've certainly talked to some coaches about that because I've wondered myself. Here in this area of football, even though it gets a lot of attention and it is the number one sport in terms of fan interest and fan participation at games and kind of excitement and the amount of people who follow it, it is a secondary sport for a lot of athletes here. There are a lot of athletes in this area who are lacrosse players or baseball players, right? And will they want to take what is an 7 or 8 week stretch between, if they're a winter athlete, and the spring season, and squeeze in a football season, which as we know can be rigorous on the body, right?
Right.
So that's a question that I have. A lot of coaches say that their athletes have told them they're ready to go, they want to play, and we always do joke, sometimes when athletes are playing, have a crunch schedule, they're playing a lot of games, they're playing basketball or hockey on back-to-back nights, or we had a few years ago where they're playing 3 football games in 11 days. I'll have a coach remind me, like, look, these are 16, 17-year-old kids. Like, they'll be okay physically. They're used to playing 80 AAU basketball games over the summer. Some of them, like, physically they'll be okay. And I do think there's definitely some truth to that. But you do wonder if you're a spring athlete in particular, which you have a lot of around here, who's going to play college baseball or college lacrosse and is already committed or is hoping, like you're saying, to impress some recruiters. Is it worth squeezing a football season in just before you play the spring? That's a question I think we won't really know the answer to till till that time comes around. Are athletes willing to do that? So I think that is one question. And then obviously you're talking about recruiting. I think certain sports have been affected more than others. I mean, obviously, outside of football, most recruiting is done during the spring and summer with club teams and AAU teams and whatnot. In terms of baseball and lacrosse and soccer, a lot of those athletes have still been participating over the summer months. Because youth sports are treated differently than scholastic sports. They're not connected to school, which I think sometimes people lose grasp of that. Like, you can play a club team and not have to worry about it affecting K through 12 in a school district if there's a breakout, right? So that's something that had changed in July, where athletes were competing and participating. So that won't affect their recruiting. Football, however, I mean, it's tough. There's no other way to play football without game, or to get recruited without game film.
Right.
And remember, camps were canceled. Prospect camps in the spring at these colleges, 7-on-7 passing tournaments, lineman challenges, all these things that are usually held over the summer, whether it's at colleges or high schools, they were all canceled. That really hurts them. And I think football even, remember, the signing date for football is actually in February. So if there's a season that doesn't begin until mid-March,
Right.
you're talking about no new game film. And, that will definitely hurt the recruiting of some players. Now, I think there's a lot of coaches who hope that the NCAA will change that, and maybe it'll be a later signing date and it will allow those athletes to get recruited and get some game film out before colleges make their decisions. But certainly right now, I would say that that's the group that's been affected the most, because you talk about around here, you have great swimming, great golf, great field hockey, great baseball, lacrosse, soccer. All those athletes have been able to do something, get in front of some people, get some tape to some people. But I think football is a sport that affects the most just because of the nature of the game. And look, there's no off season, there's no AAU football, there's no club football. And I think that, probably affects them the most.
Now, as somebody who goes around during the summer to some of the different football camps around the Section 1 region, I always go to the Marino camp every year, 3-4 days in a row, for example. And June 24th came, and I'm looking at my watch, and the date says June 24th. Shouldn't I be like watching Ryan Mamaroneck and Westlake and whoever else comes to camp, and Truman from the Bronx over at Mamaroneck? But that's not the way it was this year. And makes me think about something you said, too, about maybe the NCAA pushing the recruiting and the signing dates back from February to a little later on. Could we get into a situation where one kid says, well, I'm not going to go to college next year. I'm going to sit out, maybe wait a year before I go to college. And I didn't have my high school sports season in football, lacrosse, basketball. I want my eligibility for next year, even though I've graduated high school. I didn't use that athletic eligibility, kind of like a redshirt year.
Well, look, I think that more likely what you'd see is you'll see athletes go maybe the prep route, right? And we have that a lot around here with football as it is, because this is not a hotbed for football recruiting. And there are a lot of athletes who think they're Division I scholarship players, and they'll go and they'll play a year of prep school. Maybe that's more prevalent. I could see that being something that's more widespread, especially, we talk about if there are better answers kind of to the question that coronavirus has proposed, right? All the dangers, if there are better answers for that, if there's a vaccine, if there are better treatments, and all of a sudden, next fall, maybe a football season looks more feasible, or a basketball season or a wrestling season, I could see a lot more athletes going prep. But look, you're right. I mean, there are a lot of college students that have decided to take a gap year because they didn't want to have their family spend money or have them miss out on a regular college experience, right? So they've taken a gap year. They've pushed their admission back a year, and I think you could see athletes certainly do that as well. You're talking about only having so much time, right, to compete, so many years of eligibility, and do you want to waste one next fall if you haven't been recruited, or if you're not ready to kind of go to college and compete? And I think that'll be a question a lot of athletes will ask if we get to a point where there's no sports this winter, next spring. We still don't know what the landscape is going to look like. So much has changed over the last 6 months. I think it's honestly, it's hard to imagine what could change in a good way or a bad way these next 6 months.
In this region, I see prep schools heavily utilized in basketball, especially for somebody who is a top player but may not be there yet academically. So he'll go to a prep school in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, somewhere not too far away. Now, I could also see a situation where the prep schools get too filled up and then a kid turns around and says, hey, Pop, let's go to court. The prep school I want to go to is too filled up. I want to go back to my high school, play one more season. I have that right. It's my redshirt year.
Yeah, there was definitely some conversation about that in New Jersey. I just don't know how you implement that because, once you have an athlete who is outside of high school and, like you're saying, has eligibility left, and, like I mentioned, that was something they talked about in New Jersey, then doesn't it affect the seniors next year, the juniors who are trying to come up and play, and if somebody's taking a spot away? So I don't know. I just think it's such a slippery slope, and even one or two athletes at a school or in a county, they can really affect. I don't care about the competitive landscape at all. These are high school games. It shouldn't be all about winning and losing. It should be about participation, in addition to winning, obviously. But that just gets to be such a slippery slope to me about how it will affect the younger athletes, and then all of a sudden it's a trickle down effect, right? So they're affected. Do they get to come back the following year? I mean, it just is a really messy subject.
I also could see a school system saying, well, you're 19 years old now. You're too physically developed to come back and play against 18, 17, and 16-year-olds. That could be an issue too.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's just so many potential issues. That's why I just don't see that being a good solution to what obviously is a bad problem. Look, I feel terrible for the spring athletes who missed their entire season last spring. You remember what it's like to be 18 and be able to play with your friends as you're kind of going out and graduating. The spring is a great time for a lot of high school students, right? You don't have as many academic responsibilities usually, and it's the last time you're going to see your friends before you go away to college, and they miss that great experience. That's just not something you can get back. But obviously, these are really uncertain and unprecedented times, right? First pandemic in over 100 years, and I think that there are going to be some real negatives that come out of this. There have been some just really tremendous negatives that have come out of it, and I don't think I unfortunately I think that's the way it's going to be, and that's just going to have to be accepting of that.
Josh Thomson here on the Sports Report, Westchester, Putnam, and DutchessTalkRadio.com. Josh Thomson is the sports editor for the Journal News, LoHud.com, and the Poughkeepsie Journal, covering the entire Hudson Valley region with high school sports. Josh, there's supposed to be student athletes. You've talked already about during the spring, during the winter, pushing all these three seasons back to back to back, the fall, the winter, and the spring sports seasons. That gives kids no time to recuperate with their bodies in between. But also, too, if a three-sport athlete played, let's say, football from January to February, and then in March and April plays basketball, and then in May and June he runs track, isn't he supposed to be in school in between there, too, besides having to practice all the time, which you would have to do that?
Yeah, great question. I know that's definitely a concern with Regents exams in the spring. I know that's something that the state is definitely considering. But again, I think it kind of just gets back to my last point, which is these are unprecedented times. There are going to be some people are trying as hard as they can to do the best things for high school athletes, high school students, right? I mean, right now we have districts, some are hybrid learning, some are remote learning. Kind of doing the best they can. It's something that, just my philosophy as a parent. I have two little kids who are in school, and, you just kind of have to hope the school district does the best they can. Your kids kind of learn as much as they can. I don't think anybody would say that their children are getting the same level of education or in what we're talking about, the same level of athletic experience, right, that you'd be normally getting during a normal year, but these aren't normal times. And I think that everybody now is just trying to kind of do the best they can and, try to give the kids the best experience they can have, whether that's in school or on the athletic field.
Now, I do work public address in a number of schools and practically every sport around the section. And I try to nicely figure out as we go along from different athletic directors in schools that I work at and for what the story is or what it might be as an email from one athletic director said to me a few days ago, "That's all I got for you now." And I know, like, don't ask him again until he gets back to me. And I think really that's the way to approach this right now. It's still, despite the guidance we have so far, wait and see, because September 29th, around Section 1 here, is when we can get things going. Nassau County is not doing anything until January, at least. That's the one county in this area that's not going to do anything, supposedly, in the springtime as of yet. What do you see happening from what you know at different schools around Section 1 throughout the lower Hudson Valley? Will that September 29th date hold true, or do you see this date getting pushed back further, or do you see a number of individual schools saying, I know I can do this today, September 29th. Let's see how things shake out October 18th.
Look, you have Section 8 and Section 11, Long Island. You have Section 9. You have Section 4. Basically, none of them in their entirety are having a fall sports season, right? So,
right. Middle Hudson Valley is Section 9. And
right.
Orange and Ulster County, Sullivan County, and the upper part of Dutchess County, too.
Right. So right. None of them are having a fall sports season, right? So that made me think that Section 1 sports were definitely in jeopardy. Even field hockey and soccer and swimming and tennis, etc. I've been told so far that they plan to try to start next Tuesday. That's the idea with the Section 1 from the superintendents. Obviously, the superintendents are really the ones who are calling the shots. We had Yonkers Public Schools, which is 8 schools in the city of Yonkers. They decided not to play any fall sports. The only fall sport they had was soccer that was remaining. So they're the only school district so far that has pushed back. But if you're going to tell me that some other school districts aren't going to be able to go September 29th, I wouldn't be surprised. Here's, I think, something that a lot of people that want their kids to play, they're desperate for their kids to play, and a lot of athletes don't understand, right? A lot of the big cities in our area, you're talking about Yonkers, New Rochelle, White Plains, they're not even in school. They're remote only. So the question is, when practices and games start on September 29th, how are those kids going to get to school for practice and for games every day? I'm not saying they can't. What I'm saying is it's a huge complication, and I think that that's something that many people are overlooking. There are even school districts in Rockland County. They're not as urban as the ones I just mentioned that are remote only. Clarkstown, Suffern, etc. So, I think that is a huge complication. Do you want kids walking around town, riding their bikes around town every afternoon after they're done with their classes to go to this high school to have soccer practice or to have cross-country practice? I'm not saying it's not going to happen. And I think in some places it's pretty easy. I mean, look, you have places like Dobbs Ferry, which is a 1 square mile, I think. Kids can walk pretty easily for practice. But if you're talking about the city of Yonkers, if you're in the southwest part of Yonkers and the near the Riverdale border, are you going to be able to make it all the way to Roosevelt High School every afternoon for practice? I mean, it's not as easy as some people think, which is why I think Yonkers, part of the reason Yonkers is kind of pushing its sports back. And so, if you ask me, the question is, are sports going to go off as planned seamlessly on September 29th? I'm still taking kind of a wait and see approach. I think it's not going to be easy. I hope they do it. I think it'd be great to get student athletes back in the field and participating again. Certainly the infection rate in our area is fairly low, as low as it's been since, back before people even knew about coronavirus. I hope it happens, but I definitely think, I definitely have some skepticism about, how well they'll be able to execute it or how well it'll be pulled off and how long it'll last once it starts.
And in reference to your point about schools in the lower part of Westchester all having remote learning right now, in one of those schools, I happen to be on an athletic committee there for more than 30 years, and we needed to get together for a quick function just a few days ago, and what we had to do was just drive up to the bus ramp at the school, and everything had to be done quickly. Don't get out of your car. So how are we going to have sports at that school, for example, if for a quick function you can't even get out of your car?
Right. I think that's a very fair question. And that according to the NYSPHSAA, they're going to allow two spectators, parents, basically per athlete at athletic contests. And, that's another, if you're talking about a soccer team is 20 athletes, it's another 30 or 40 people, in addition to the 30 or 40 athletes, the coaches, the trainers. You're talking about over 100 people probably roughly at a game. I mean, again, my question is that going to be able to be? Are they going to be able to pull it off? Are we even going to get started? I hope so, but there are definitely some complications that I think the people who are really pushing to play are overlooking a little bit. And again, it is a lot different than youth sports, which were held over the summer. It's a lot different because you're talking about an entire school district, the health and the safety of entire school district, who is, kind of at stake or at risk if you're having athletic contests in a school district. It's a lot different than the Taconic Rangers baseball team having 15 players for a club game over the summer. I think it's a lot different. So, I think that's, again, the two things I think people are overlooking the most is how, a scholastic sporting event can affect an entire school district. And then also the transportation aspect of it, not having those remote learning students at school and then having practice or games every day. Both those things are serious factors, I think, in whether or not it's a safe return to play this fall.
You read my mind. I was going to ask you about spectators. You covered that. And from a standpoint of working public address at a game, I have to figure out how I can socially distance in certain situations. I already have it in my head. In certain school districts, I can distance one way. In other districts, I can distance another. And one or two other districts, I might have to make a suggestion as to how we could all socially distance. But before you go, I want to ask you, with all these variables, how do you put a schedule together?
Well, Section 1 actually last week came out with its fall sports schedule last Thursday, an amended schedule, a fewer number of games. Obviously, it's going to be a shorter season, most likely. I mean, I think they will go deeper into November with the season than they normally do. Usually you have sectional championship games around the first weekend of November, those first few days. And then, frankly, most teams are out of competition by that point, right? Because you have 4 or 5 classes in each sport, and those are the only teams that are left playing. So I think that there will be more teams playing deeper into the month of November. But, yeah, I mean, I think the schedules are going to be complicated. I asked the football coach who I talked to this morning on the phone, have they heard that their schedule will change in that season in March? And he said he doesn't think so, but, again, very much up in the air. It's funny, I asked some people from Section 1 a couple weeks ago about winter sports and, football schedules. And, they kind of laughed. It's like, we're so intent and so focused on just pulling off the fall season, we can't even think about those kind of things yet. And I think they'll probably move to that soon if the fall season does start successfully. But, yeah, I mean, how do you put a football schedule together? Do you limit travel, right? Do you limit the number of contests? Those are all things that the section is going to be taking into account. That's a decision that's made at the section level. That's the NYSBHSA stated that pretty clearly, that the section, if they want to shorten the soccer season to 12 games instead of 18 or 20, it's their right to do that. It's their decision to do that. I think you'll have different sections doing different things. I mean, you already have some sections that are getting underway today, 8 days ahead of Section 1. So, yeah, there's just so many things to consider. I wonder in particular with football, football is not as regional, as geographical as it used to be, scheduling. So I wonder if they'll go back to more of a geographic element to that. I know there was some talk about that over the last month. From the person I talked to today, he said he didn't think that would be the case. He thinks they'll kind of stick with the schedule they had in place and just kind of shift all those games to March and April. We'll see. It's not easy.
Could we have backed everything up to at least January just to play it safe? Is that the feeling you hear from coaches by chance, or is it kind of wait and see on the part of everybody?
So I don't think that is the right call, and I'll tell you why. There's what is different about from November 30th, which is when the winter season will start now. What changes between November 30th and January 4th that you are going to back the whole season up for that, whatever that is, 5 or 6 weeks, right? So you're basically costing yourself 5 or 6 weeks to play. What has changed from November 30th till January 4th? I don't really know. Now, if you're talking about wanting to see in September to start school, to see if the infection rate rises, to see how safe the reopening of schools are, totally get that. I think that's what happened across the state. Happened, with that extra week here in Section 1. I think that's the right call. Just to, they didn't want to have practice on the first day of school. Let's put it that way. They didn't want to be bringing kids in under this new hybrid learning model or remote learning model for the first time ever, and then being like, oh yeah, we have practice at 3:00 tonight. They didn't want that to happen, which I totally get. But I think that you have enough time before November 30th to make decisions, to put proper protocols in place, safety protocols, and that's only if you get the okay from the governor's office to play, which I still think is the biggest question in this, right? So these are indoor sports. They're not outdoors. We know it's a lot safer to be outdoors than indoors. They're higher contact sports, boys basketball, girls basketball, hockey, wrestling, much more complicated to pull that off, I think, than to play soccer or field hockey in the fall. So, we'll see what happens. But I don't think it's smart to just say, let's push it back till after the holidays. I do think in that case you cost yourself over a month where you could be playing sports and, getting some of those competitions and practices out of the way without really condensing the schedules for yet another season.
I guess it all comes down to bottom line now throughout this academic school year, right into and through 2021. It's all in a lot of ways, even though we have a lot of it on paper now, still to be determined.
Absolutely. Yep.
Gus Thomson, we thank you for joining us here on Westchester, Putnam, and Dutchess Talk Radio, all wrapped into one today to discuss an issue affecting all three counties and Rockland County, too. The Section 1 Lower Hudson Valley High School sports season for 2021. Josh Thompson is the sports editor for the Journal News, WOHA.com, and the Poughkeepsie Journal, covering all of Section 1 and Section 9, too, with Poughkeepsie Journal as well. Josh, you've got those duties as well in the Middle Hudson Valley. Here on Westchester, Putnam, and Dutchess Talk Radio, produced by Sharc, S-H-A-R-C, with a C, not a K, Creative. I'm John Marino. We thank you for being part of the Sports Report here on Westchester, Putnam, and Dutchess Talk Radio, made possible by our good friends over at Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center. At Entergy, they promise to keep supporting our communities right through April of 2021. Lipolis Electric. Don't be left in the dark. Get Lipolis. Hightower, Westchester, managing your wealth to a fiduciary standard. White Plains Hospital. We thank our heroes at White Plains Hospital for all they have done throughout the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic here in 2020. Wartburg Healthcare and Rehabilitation in Mount Vernon. Park Sterling Realty and Michael Labriola Landscape Design and Construction. We thank you one and all. Catch all of our Westchester, Putnam, Dutchess, and Fairfield County talk radio programming on our YouTube channel of Sharc Creative YouTube.